When the FDA issued its policy in May of 1992, it asserted there was an overwhelming consensus among scientists that GE foods are so safe they don't require any testing. Was this true?
No, it's not true. And a lawsuit that I initiated against the FDA, which forced that agency to hand over more than 44,000 pages of its internal files on genetically engineered foods, demonstrates that statement is not true, that claim is not true, because it shows that the the overwhelming consensus among the FDA's own scientific expert staff is that genetic engineering is very different than conventional breeding, and it entails higher risks, and that all of its foods have to be carefully tested, rigorously tested, before they're put on the market and fed to the population. And it also showed that the FDA itself knew that there was not a scientific consensus about safety within the scientific community outside the FDA, the general scientific community. In fact, one of the letters I found, one of the most damning documents I found within the FDA's files, was a letter from the FDA's biotechnology coordinator to a Canadian health official admitting that there was not a consensus about about safety within the scientific community. And yet, about 7 months after that letter was written, the FDA came out with that policy claiming there was an overwhelming consensus. Outright lie. Sacrificing the truth to enable the GMO venture to advance while sacrificing responsible regulation and imposing serious risks on the population, risks that its own scientists had warned about. I can't think, actually, of a bigger governmental fraud than that one, at least not within a Western democracy. Can think of some within Stalinist Russia or, the Third Reich, but within a modern Western democracy, that may rank as the worst governmental fraud.
Have they currently a scientific consensus that genetically engineered foods are safe?
No, there has never been a scientific consensus that GMOs are safe. As I noted, the FDA's biotechnology manager wrote a letter to a Canadian health official in the fall of 1991 conceding that there was not a consensus about safety then, and there's never been one since. And in fact, several eminent scientific organizations have issued cautionary statements. Now, the claims that come out from the biotech promoters are that there's an overwhelming consensus of safety. In fact, in 2012, the board of directors of the American Association for the Advancement of Science released a statement claiming, among other falsehoods, that that every respected scientific organization that has reviewed the data has come to the same conclusion, that genetically engineered foods are no riskier than conventional foods. But that's not an accurate statement. In fact, in 2001, the Royal Society of Canada, that nation's premier scientific body, came out with a major report in which they stated that the default prediction for every genetically engineered food should be that the genetic engineering process has created at least one or more unintended side effects, some of which could be harmful to the health of the ultimate consumer. They also stated it's scientifically unjustifiable to presume that any genetically engineered food is safe unless it has gone through a battery of rigorous tests that were far more rigorous than the Canadian regulators were requiring at the time, far more rigorous than the FDA has ever come close to requiring, and more rigorous than any regulators anywhere in the world were or have since required. So if the guidelines of the Canadian report had been followed, there wouldn't be any genetically engineered foods on the market right now, or any that were on the market would have passed a much stricter, more rigorous battery of tests. So That's the state. Also, the British Medical Society has come out with cautions. The Public Health Association of Australia, beginning in the year 2000, has released report after report showing, cautioning about the risks, explaining the risks, criticizing the regulatory agencies for not paying attention to the science and to the risks, and for allowing very shoddy safety tests to be done by the manufacturers in order to gain approval for their foods and get them onto dinner plates of Australians and Americans and Canadians. It's really quite astounding what's been going on. In the name of science, under the banner of science, science has been perverted and subverted.
Now that we know all of that, is there a consensus at the FDA that GE foods are safe?
Well, the scientists at the FDA, to the extent we have documentation on their opinion, their consensus was they can't be presumed safe, either as a class or individually, and each one, in fact, must be presumed to entail abnormal risks and have its safety verified by rigorous testing, which, by the way, is what the U.S. food safety law also requires. Most people don't know that. The U.S. food safety law on the books is very strict, and that strict law applies to GMOs, genetically engineered foods. In our lawsuit, the FDA conceded that, and they had conceded it back in their 1992 policy statement, that the laws, the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, as it was amended in 1958 to cover food additives, that these new DNA constructs that are being put into various grains and fruits and vegetables would qualify as food additives that are presumed unsafe and have to be tested and demonstrated safe unless they are generally recognized as safe. That's why they claim there's an overwhelming consensus, because they need to claim that in order to state that these foods, basically according to law, can be on the market without requiring any testing. The FDA does not require one iota of testing. Now, in public, they claim they are, and biotech proponents always state, oh no, these foods have to go through rigorous review with the FDA. Poppycock. That is not true at all. Now, the FDA did set up a procedure for voluntary consultation, but the internal documents that the lawsuit I initiated forced out of their files shows that was set up to basically give the illusion that there was regulation, while also giving the manufacturers free rein to do whatever they wanted. So it's all voluntary. In fact, a significant proportion of the GMO foods on the market have not even gone through the voluntary consultation. But scientists who've actually studied what's going on said, it's a joke, because the FDA accepts whatever the manufacturers, the Monsantos, the DuPonts tell them, and they rubber stamp it. And in fact, the biotechnology coordinator, manager for the FDA, even in writing once admitted that that process is not a scientific review. Because for one thing, the FDA doesn't require original data. So he said it's not a scientific review, but in public, the FDA claims it is. So it's just part of the massive fraud through which genetically engineered foods have entered the market. The FDA, it bears repeating and it bears emphasizing, the FDA has been misrepresenting the facts, lying about the extent of scientific consensus, covering up the fact that to the extent they know of consensus within their own ranks, among their own scientists, the consensus was overwhelmingly that GMOs entail abnormal risks. And they've been breaking the food safety law to boot. They're lying and they're breaking our law, and to date they've been getting away with it. Again, that's another reason I wrote my book, so that they no longer will be able to get away with it. And when enough people of influence and goodwill and integrity have read my book, they won't be able to get away with it.
So it's clear what you're saying is there's no rigorous testing on each crop
No rigorous
by the
testing has
FDA.
been required in the United States or Canada, and even though there has been some testing required in the European Union and some other countries, it has not been at the level of rigor that independent scientists have said who understand what the genetic engineering process is and the unique risks it imposes, the abnormal risks that it imposes. They have called for testing much stricter than has been imposed by any regulatory body. And it's interesting that up until 2013, even the EU, the European Union, did not require testing, safety testing with the whole food. That only became required in 2013. But even then, the European Union only required medium-term 90-day tests, and many experts have called for much longer-term testing than that, and there's good reason for that. And the experts who wrote the Royal Society of Canada's report in 2001 emphasized that there needed to be long-term testing not only on animals, but then human clinical trials, as in the case of drugs. Nobody's required that. So again, according to many experts, including Canada's premier scientific body, no genetically engineered food on the market has gone through a series of tests rigorous enough to basically give us any confidence about its safety.